So hello, and thank you for tuning in. I would like to introduce to you an amazing Israel-Palestine peace advocate named Emanuel Shahaf. So hello, I've known him for
Thank you for tuning
about
in.
a year.
I would like
I've known him for about
to
a year,
introduce to you an amazing,
and I had an echo, so I needed to mute. But I've known him for about a year by now, and he is one of the foremost proponents of a major type of Israel-Palestine peace solution that is growing in popularity. It's called Federation. Federation is regional governments under a larger central government. Emanuel Shahaf's specific proposal involves federating Israel and the West Bank, with Gaza organically entering a structure potentially later. Israel and the West Bank would be divided into 30 cantons with regional government, and additional governmental structures would be put into Israel, as he is going to talk about, to handle the new governmental arrangement. This would mean that everyone in that area has got equal citizenship rights. Now, Emanuel is just incredibly determined, and he's really been pounding the pavement about the federation solution. And I have been working with him for a year now, especially writing articles. And this was a very good collaboration. He has a lot of amazing ideas about the articles. Another thing is that he's the author of a book called Identity: The Quest for Israel's Future. That's his autobiography, and that you can buy on Amazon. Identity: The Quest for Israel's Future tells his very interesting life story, talks about his upbringing, talks about how he was an executive in the Israeli government in a very high-powered position, and lived in a number of different countries in a number of different regions all over the world. And he's had a very interesting life. So now I'm going to cede the floor so that he can talk.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Let's not waste any time. I'll start with the presentation and we'll go to the screen sharing. Let's see how it goes. And it seems to be going. All right, hold it. Here we are. Okay, we are definitely on April 11th. We're doing this for Unity is Strength, and this is the Federation proposal. And here you have my details, address, and our website for the Federation. Whoever wants it later can put it on the chat as well. Let's look at the situation where we are at now, okay? Two states or what? The main proposal for a resolution to the conflict has been for the last 20 years or even more than that, the two-state solution. It is still the main resolution that is being discussed, but unfortunately, it is very unlikely to be implemented in the foreseeable future. We in Israel have had now 4 election campaigns in a row where the conflict with the Palestinians hasn't even been discussed, hasn't been an issue. It's just not on the horizon there. And even in our upcoming election, which may be sooner than we think, I don't think it's going to be an issue. The Palestinians have had are about to have another election, the first elections after 15 years coming. And even in their elections, the resolution to the conflict is not the main issue. The main issue is how to split up the cake in Palestine, or what's left of it. Basically, a two-state solution at this time is politically extremely unlikely. The Palestinians are terribly weakened. They're not really in a position to lead anything Israel is not interested in leading anything, definitely not a two-state solution politically. The US administration is, for the time being, playing it safe. And it doesn't look good for the two-state solution. And to tell you the truth, I really don't think that the two-state solution, and I'm not the only one, is a good way to resolve the conflict. Let's have a look at what two states looked like before Trump came into the game. This is during approximately the mid-end Obama administration. This is what the two states would have looked like if they would ever come to being. We see here that Palestine has been taken out to show what it looks like, how small it is, how it's really, it doesn't look like a viable state, and it's really not surprising that it never came to beyond being something of a strange image on a map. So when Trump came into the game to resolve the conflict with his greatest plan ever, it started to look like something like this. Okay, we're looking here on the left side, we're looking at the state of Israel, and on the right side, the state of Palestine, which is in green in both pictures, but I'll explain the difference. First of all, we see here that there's a lack of contiguity. There is the Gaza Strip, which is still connected here through through a tunnel. But here there are two parts of the territory, Palestinian territory, which are not connected except for by a road. And then there are areas here which are barely connected. And here you see there are about 15 Israeli enclaves within Palestine and within the Palestinian state. And if we go now look at the Palestinian state, we see that the Palestinian these units are connected by all kinds of tunnels and roads and all kinds of constructions. It's a mess. It's a total mess. And this plan, of course, was not done in any way with the Palestinians. They had nothing to say on this. It was put on the table, and Trump declared that this is the best plan ever, like he always did. And not surprisingly, there were very few takers. Israel was positively impressed by most of the proposals. Some of the proposals Israel objected to as well. Israel did not in any way agree to those 15 enclaves, and but it didn't go anywhere beyond that anyway. Our main concern is and has always been security. Okay. Security in the whole area, and the security means access. As we saw with the Gaza Strip, the moment we lost access to the Gaza Strip, when we decided to withdraw, the security situation there became very problematic, and we were not able to maintain good security. And that's what Israel's citizens feel, that if we do the same thing regarding the West Bank, if we return the West Bank and lose access, a similar situation will arise where we will have a total lack of security as a result of losing access. So whatever solution we should come up with, we should have access, and that means it basically excludes a two-state solution, because another sovereign state next to us would mean we don't have access, or we don't have access whenever we want. So it's not a going thing. The other issue, in addition to access, is we need secure borders. Now, this is kind of there's a kind of a contradiction, because the way we look at the two states is they over there, we over here, and a very tall wall in the middle. Now, the implications of that are, first of all, an amazingly long wall. The wall for the Trump proposal, the wall would be about 1,700 kilometers long, which is, I think, about the length of the wall Trump wanted to build between the United States and Mexico. But something amazing. And it would be, of course, completely ruinous for the economy, for the Palestinian economy, because any border like that is, of course, a complete obstruction to trade, bilateral trade. No matter how many gates you put into there, it makes life miserable for everybody who wants to move from one side to the other, which would, of course, have severe implications for the not for the economy on one side and for the security on the other side, because the moment the economy goes south, there will be an increase in terror, because what do people do? They don't like what they have, so they start blowing things up. So let's look at the economic side, which is one of the main reasons the two-state solution is not, the two-state solution is a disaster, mainly for the Palestinians. Okay, if we look at the Palestinian economy, the 80% of the Palestinian economy, approximately 80%, is dependent on Israel. Okay, we're talking about between 200 and 300,000 workers who work in Israel or in the occupied or in Israeli settlements in the occupied territories every day. They go there. And we're talking about further numbers who are working in Palestinian industry for Israeli industries. So they all would suffer tremendously, and the economy, the Palestinian economy is not too hot. We're talking about the GDP there is about 1/10 of Israel's GDP. Israel's GDP is about $40,000 per capita per year. In the West Bank, it's about 4,000, probably 3,500, something like that, per capita per year, which is a huge gradient. 1 to 10 in two economies which are next to each other. It's not surprising there's a lot of criminal activities across border. And in Gaza, it's even less than 3,500. In Gaza, it's probably about between 1,500 and 2,000. So the implications for the economy are of any two-state solution would be a total disaster for the Palestinian economy. Now let's look at the other side of the coin, which is Israeli economy. Israel, startup nation, everything's cool, everything's great, we're the greatest. If you look at the numbers, the startup economy, the high tech, is only about 10 to 15% of Israel's economy. We have a quite large sector of the economy, which is low tech, mid tech, and all the rest. And it turns out that the Palestinian Authority is our 5th largest trading partner. Usually doesn't come up because Palestine is not recognized as a state. So whenever you see Israel's trading partners, you don't see Palestine on the list, but it's there. It's in 5th place, and it is a huge market for Israeli companies, and who would also be harmed by any second two-state coming into being. And there's another issue. Israel, just a sec. Israel is reaching the limit of its capability in terms of manpower. And the problem is that we can only generate that much manpower to keep the growth rates in high tech the way they're going. And we need to access more other parts of the population. There are only 2 parts of the population under Israel's sovereignty or Israel's control, which can be accessed. One of them are the ultra-Orthodox, who are very difficult to access because they're culturally, they object culturally to getting involved in the work cycle, and it's a big job, and it'll take many years. And the other part of the population, which is easier accessible and theoretically, are the Arabs, the Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territories, who happen to be very highly educated on average, because one of the things they can do is study. So they have the education level is very high, and they could actually serve or help support Israel's high-tech industry, and thus increase the situation of the economy also in in the Palestinian areas if we would find some kind of arrangement to make that happen. Let's have a look at Israel's centralized economy. The top part here is actually a measure not of economics, but of politics. This is a measure of the centralization of Israel, the state of Israel. It's one of the most highly centralized states, modern states around in the OECD. Definitely here, we are the last one, okay? Almost the last one. The others don't disappear. The other ones are tiny, so they don't really count. This is the amount of political centralization, okay? And what does it mean? It means that in Israel, basically everything serious is being decided in Jerusalem and not in the periphery, in the areas where people live, okay? So this has a very, very considerable impact on the development of the economy. It prevents equality in the whole country. And very recently, Israel's Ministry of the Interior put out a report which is basically calling for splitting the country into regions, into what I'm going to propose later for the political solution. So we have it coming, okay? We have regionalization coming in order to get out of our political centralization. And here on the lower graph, which is unfortunately only in Hebrew, but it's easy to explain, you see here the pie chart. 53% of Israel's high-tech startup economy is in Tel Aviv. Okay, the green is Tel Aviv. This here, the black blue, 24% in the central region. Jerusalem has 8%. Haifa has 7%. The north has 6%, and the south has 3%. Those 3% are located in about 60 or 70% of Israel's land, okay? So it's completely lopsided, completely centralized, completely undistributed, and ready for a big change. There's another issue which is rarely discussed, but I think American Jews are familiar with it on another aspect. We're talking about loyalty to the state, okay? What the impact of a two-state would be for the Palestinians. We're looking here at two Palestinian citizens of Israel. This man is Raed Saleh. He is the head of the Islamic movement in the north of the country, which has been forbidden by law now, the northern movement. He may actually be in jail right now or just out in between jail terms. And this is Muhammad Barakeh, a former member of parliament of one of the Arab parties. At this time, they have one state to be loyal to, and that's Israel. Okay, they have no other state to be loyal to. They're, of course, promoting Palestinian nationality. If a second Palestinian state would come into being, that would be an issue. It would be an issue for them. It would also be an issue for Israelis who will look at them and say, hey, those are not loyal to us, let's kick them out. Okay, so this would give rise to and it already has. I mean, there are Israeli politicians right now who are talking about the possibility of kicking Arabs out in the two-state scenario, or somehow giving them Palestinian citizenship and shipping them off in some way. So this is another issue which is, of course, highly problematic, and if a two-state solution would be relevant, then it would have to be dealt with. So what are we talking about? We're talking about two states or what? Okay, this is a voting booth here for soldiers who go to vote. If you look at the Knesset right now, there's only a minority who would support two states. But what are the alternatives? Okay, if we are, let's go back here. If we can either look at two states, or we can say status quo, which means continuing the occupation, or else we could talk about annexation / apartheid. Annexation could imply apartheid. or we could talk about a confederation, which is also two states in the end. And that's one of the reasons I don't believe confederation is at all a possibility at this time, because for the same reason the two states aren't. So let's say, if we talk about annexation and apartheid, now, first of all, the apartheid claim is, of course, disingenuous. Whatever situation is in Israel right now, or even in the occupied territories, is not apartheid, doesn't amount to apartheid, is not close to apartheid. But the problem starts to arise when we're talking about annexation, okay? If we start to annex parts of the West Bank, any parts of the West Bank, we have to decide whether the people who live there, the Palestinians who live in that area, are going to be citizens, Israeli citizens. If they are not Israeli citizens, and Netanyahu has already said that if he goes for annexation of Palestinian territories in the West Bank, they will not be made Israeli citizens. The implications are that there are going to be two populations in one sovereignty under two different laws, which is exactly the situation right now in the occupied territories, except as long as it's occupied, it's temporary, and the moment you go to annexation, it becomes not temporary, and that becomes a problem. So at that moment, they basically are, if they will be annexed and not given citizenship, they're basically disenfranchised. They can only vote in local elections and not in the elections of the country that is in charge of them. And that is the basis of apartheid, okay? Apartheid starts with disenfranchisement, and so we have a problem. And we have a problem because Israel at this time, and also in the foreseeable future, will not allow another sovereignty between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean. All right. So what do we need in a political solution? First of all, the main criteria, or central criteria, has to be political implementability. The main reason that the two-state solution is basically off the radar now, because it's not politically implementable. There's probably a 2/3 Knesset majority right now against a two-state solution. There's about 80 members out of the 120 who are against the two-state solution. So we need something which both the right and the left can connect to, mainly the right, actually. And that means that basically we need to have our security considerations to be recognized. The second thing we need, we should have that, is it should be acceptable to the Palestinians. Okay, now when I say it should be acceptable to the Palestinians, I don't necessarily mean that it should be acceptable to all the Palestinians, and I don't even mean that it should be acceptable to the Palestinian leadership. But it should be acceptable to most of the population, so they should easily recognize that this is good for them, and if it would be put to a vote among them, that they would vote in favor. At the same time, we should reserve ourselves what we call unilateral implementability, meaning that we shouldn't be in a situation where the Palestinians, by not willing to negotiate, force us to maintain the situation the way it is. We should be able to go ahead with whatever plan we come up with. We should be able to implement it, at least to a certain extent, up to a certain extent, before we put it to a vote. So unilateral implementability is one of the conditions. We should be able to get international recognition, meaning that whatever we come up with gets at least the support of the United States, Europe, the United Nations. It has to be something which clearly is a huge improvement over what we're doing now, and it definitely has to put away with the occupation, which basically means we have to accept international law. We have to stick to human rights and civil rights to make sure that the plan we're proposing is in line with these things. It also has to have clear benefits for the Palestinians, clear and tangible benefits for the Palestinians. And I'm not only talking about economical benefits, because that's relatively easy, but it has to be clear to them that the plan has political benefits, basically that it gives them equal rights and that they can see the light at the end of the tunnel. We can't just fob them off. It has to be clear that the Palestinians understand that that it's beneficial for them, to the extent that they'll vote in favor if they will be able to vote on it. Last, we have to, of course, maintain Israel's security. This is a central issue, and this in this case it basically means that the border should be along the Jordan River, and that we should have access to the whole territory. That's, you know, if we do that, then we should be pretty safe. It should be acceptable to the neighbors. Meaning the moderate Sunni countries, and they don't have to agree to all of it, but it should be, you know, it shouldn't cause them to object strenuously, and it has to have a plan to deal with the refugee problem in a constructive way. Okay, the refugee problem is a central issue for the Palestinians. For us, it's mainly being used in order to tell everybody we can't make an arrangement with the Palestinians because the Palestinians want right of return. Right of return is an emotional issue more than a practical issue. If you now go to the Palestinian governor of the Hebron area and you ask him how many refugees will you accept if I let all of them in, he'll give you a very small number. Okay, he will, because he also has only limited area, limited economic capability. So in practical terms, this can be addressed, and it has to be addressed not through one thing, not through the right of return, through a whole arrangement of solutions, which will include a settlement in third countries, restitution, and also to some extent an agreed upon return on some kind of quota system, and a normalization of immigration laws in Israel. Last not least, what we need is whatever plan we come up with, it has to be flexible. Because, you know, we should be able to deal with changes and changes in the situation. It should be something that could be geared to alternatives and so on and so forth. So what have we come up with? We'd like to think that the Federation proposal pretty much addresses most of these requirements. We're calling for the extension of Israeli law to the West Bank. That's a euphemism for annexation, but that's in practical terms what we're talking about. We're annexing the whole area here in green between the central part of Israel and the Jordan River. The Golan Heights are of course part of Israel already, and we're not talking about them because nobody's, you know, there's nobody to return them to in this time. Anyway, this will be annexed. We will not include the Gaza Strip in the annexation for demographic reasons. The area we're talking about between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean, not including the Gaza Strip, would give us a 2/3, 1/3 demographic balance, 2/3 Jewish, 1/3, which should be enough to calm down most Jews who are very afraid of the demographic situation. But I'm not sure that that's enough. But we have some other safeguards. As I said, we will not include the Gaza Strip for demographic reasons, because if we would include the Gaza Strip, we would end up with a 50-50% demographic balance, which would be completely unacceptable to Israelis. Gaza would be given independence, which it basically has now, would be an independent Palestinian state. It would be given a port, an airport, border arrangements, cross-border arrangements, all what it needs to get on its feet, all the support. But for the time being, as political entity, it should be separate. It can at a later stage, of course, become part of a confederation with Israel, or even part of the federation when we get to that stage, but not at this time. The initial reaction of most Palestinians to this is, no way, we will not agree to it no matter what. But when you talk to them and they realize that it doesn't mean that Gaza will be ignored, but it means that if Gaza gets all the support it needs and the humanitarian support to get on its feet, and you remind them that Gaza basically was separate for 19 years, between 1947 and 1967, for 20 years almost, and has also been separate since 2005, which is also already another 16 years. So it's not, it's not as if Gaza has always been the part of the West Bank or so. It's a possibility, and actually it's in our framework, it's a precondition for the federation. We would call for the writing of a constitution for Israel or for the federation. Israel was supposed to have a constitution from day one in our Declaration of Independence, or not day one, but day two. In our Declaration of Independence, it called for the writing a constitution. That was never put into writing. We have a semblance of a constitution, but it's not really a constitution because it can be changed by a simple majority vote in Knesset. So we don't have a constitution at this time. A federation requires a constitution. It would require a constitution which we write together with the Palestinians. It would be a secular constitution, and it would be, because of that, it is probably going to be easier to write a constitution together with the Palestinians than to write one for the Jews, for the Jewish state, although I may be wrong there. But there are plenty of constitutions to look at when writing a constitution like that. The next step, or part of the step, would be, of course, citizenship for all Palestinians who want it. Okay, we can't force people to take citizenship of a federation, but they should all have an offer to get the citizenship, and it should be a genuine offer, not not what's happening now in East Jerusalem, where people can theoretically become citizens, but by the time they get citizenship, they're old enough to spend to just go pass away. It's just people that make them miserable trying to get a citizenship. No, it would mean that they have a clear path to citizenship within a reasonable amount of time. I'm talking about a year, 2 years, or something like that. Except, of course, for terror suspects and so on. But that should be clear. And as I said, if they all opt in, we're going to have a 2/3, 1/3 demographic balance. Next step would be setting up together with the Palestinians the federation. Okay, basically we're talking about a civic state, not a binational state. It would be, it's very difficult to nail down exactly the situation, but what we have in mind is a civil state whose nationality would be Israeli. Now, the true name for this would probably be the Federal Republic of Israel and Palestine, but that wouldn't fly with Israel for the time being. Wouldn't get a majority, so we just leave it Israel, and whoever is a citizen of this country would be an Israeli citizen. They are Jews and Palestinians, but they would have Israeli citizenship and Israeli nationality, which doesn't exist at this particular moment in time. We don't have Israeli nationality, we have Jewish nationality, and whatever else other nationalities are, where we don't have Israeli nationality. This state would create Israeli nationality. It would be split into 30 cantons, regional autonomies. 20 of them would be Jewish majority cantons. 10 of them would be Palestinian. The Jewish ones are blue. The Palestinian ones are green. The purple one is a Druze canton, which is another minority in Israel. And Jerusalem is here in gold. It's a Jewish majority canton. So that would be the situation as would be set up. The cantons will have their own constitution. They will basically represent the government in the cantons will represent the majority of the cantons. Like I said, 20 of them are Jewish majority, and I'm talking about a large majority, we're talking 70, 80%, to make sure that the canton's majority status cannot easily be changed from one to the other, because that's a measure that gives a measure of stability. So this would be the federation. There are in the world now about 27 federations which run on similar arrangements with local autonomies. As I mentioned before, the Israeli Ministry of Interior suggested just something like that, with inside the borders of Israel, without taking into account the occupied territories. So the mindset for a federal system is already being moved into the Israeli political system. We would also create an upper house for the Knesset. The upper house would represent the cantons. Each canton would send two representatives for a total of 60, which would add to the 120 of the lower house. Very important decisions would have to be accepted by a majority in both houses. This is an added security for all those Jews who are scared about the demography, because this would mean that in order to change the basic, the most important elements of the country, the system of government and so on and so forth, the definition of the state, you don't, it's not enough to have a majority in the country, okay? A majority in the country would conceivably, if they would all vote for the same party, they would have a majority in the lower house. In order to get a majority, for one of the national group, for the Palestinians, to become to get a majority in the upper house, they would have to change 6 Jewish majority cantons to Palestinian majority cantons in order to get they get 16 out of 30. Now that technically that's possible because there's nothing to prevent people from moving to cantons and so forth. But by the time this happens, nobody will give a damn anymore about who is in the majority. Okay, so we're very safe on this one. Economic unity is the biggest boon for both sides, and this is, one of the biggest things, the huge advantage of the thing. And this is, as I said, it's mentioned in the partition decision already, which called for partition decision called for political separation and economic unity, and also in the Israeli Declaration of Independence. It would be a fantastically successful economy for the whole area. And of course, I'm going back to the refugees, which is a really central issue which we have to address, and it has to be clear. But we have to take the emotions out of it, because in practical terms, it's solvable. Normalize the immigration laws of Israel to permit anybody with roots in the country to apply for citizenship, work on a quota system. There's enough space and enough economical potential to accept enough people of those who want to come in. And it has to be addressed in good faith, and we'll be able to do it. And let's all pray for the peace of Jerusalem, because that's pretty much what we can do right now, other than promote the federation. And whoever wants to read up on my on my background and also on the Federation. This is the book, Identity, the Quest for Israel's Future, which was already mentioned graciously by Rebecca. And I thank you. I'm ready to take questions now. Hold it. Let me just disentangle here the stop share. Here we are.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
So I assume that the land, all of the land in this construct of a federation would belong to Israel. Is that correct?
All the land would belong to all the citizens of all the land. What do you mean it would belong to Israel? We are basically, this is something which I didn't mention. It's kind of important, but it slipped in a way. We are basically redesigning the state. Okay, we are redefining Israel as a civil state. Okay, this is Israel, home for the Jews, a Jewish homeland, but it's a civil state. Okay, it's much more along the lines of what our forefathers had in mind, but it's not the Jewish nation state, which is nowhere mentioned, incidentally, in the Declaration of Independence. Okay, it wouldn't be a Jewish nation state. It would be the homeland for the Jews. It would be a Jewish state by virtue of the fact that the majority are Jews. But we would not have this strange arrangement where land is, is owned by the Jewish National Fund and not by the state. Okay, this will all the land will be owned by the state or whoever buys it from the state. There won't be Jewish land and non-Jewish land. There will be Israeli land, and whoever is a citizen of Israel can buy Israeli land. Okay, we're talking about equal, not talking about Israblof, as we call it. Okay, this is a revolution. This is not a not fine tuning. This is a revolution. This is coming to grips with the fact that if we want the land, okay, if we want the land of our forefathers, if we want have access and all the time, and we want sovereignty, we have to give equality and equal citizenship. If we don't, we can give it back, okay? But we're not willing to. We want to have the cake and eat it. We want the land, but we don't want to pay the price. The price is citizenship for Palestinians, equal citizenship for Palestinians, okay? And we have to deal with it.
Good answer. I just didn't know the answer to.
You're right. When you talk, we give these talks a lot. Sometimes things slip your mind, and then fortunately there are people who are aware in the audience who say, "Hey, wait a minute, what are you talking about here?" But this is a different. It's a different mindset. It's a paradigm shift. Okay, it's a paradigm shift. More than once, okay? It's once that we're going to a hybrid one-state solution from a two-state solution, which is like a completely different ball game, okay? Israeli politicians aren't ready for this. And the second thing is looking at the state as a civil state, not as a nation. The nation we're talking about is the nation of Israel, okay? We're not talking about the Jewish nation. We're talking about not the Palestinian nation. We're talking about the Israeli nation. The Israeli nation, which doesn't exist right now. It legally doesn't exist. The Supreme Court of Israel has said there is no such thing as an Israeli nation. There is such a thing as an Israeli nation. Okay, there's a great book out by Joseph Agassi. I don't remember what it's called. Israeli. I'll look it up. It gives the philosophical setting for an Israeli nation state.
Right. So I guess what I would like to see is more information about all of that, where you do the disclaimer in a lot more words, meaning here's the way the state of Israel is today, this, and this, and it's not these things.
Mhm.
Whereas the Federation, here's the way it would be, including ownership of the land. Would it be a sale or a lease for 99 years of the land? All of those other things. The land today is owned by the, I forget what you said, the
Jewish National Fund, the Keren Kayemet.
Right.
Yeah.
And under the Federation, it would be owned by, all of that. The way it is today and the way it is under the Federation or proposed under the Federation, I'd like to see all of that. Because I think it's a huge issue and it can't be just, not.
No, it's a huge issue, but we are at the stage here. We purposely don't want to go into too much detail. When I'm, some of the things also when I say what I say, I'm not 100% sure that all the people on who are pro-federation are exactly on the same page with all of those things. Okay, we also encourage people to discuss this. Okay, we're not in the situation where we want to put on the table something which is 27 paragraphs and this is what's going to be. It won't be that. Okay, whatever we put on the table, people are going to start. We don't do it. This is going to be a living constitution document, whatever we have to work on together and discuss. Okay, so I'm just putting out basically the way we see things, or the way I see things right now, and I'm not saying that this is written in stone. And if you don't want that, then don't talk to me. Okay, we're open for discussion, but the baseline is a civic state, a civil state. The land is not owned by Jews. The land is owned by the state. The state is an Israeli state by Israeli nationals who can be ethnic Chinese for all I care. But if they live in Israel, they have Israeli citizenship and Israeli nationality. That's the new thing, okay? It will be Israeli nationality and they will all be equal, okay? The Jews will be the majority, but they'll be not more than Israeli citizens and they'll have their state. It's a Jewish state. It's a Jewish state by virtue of the fact that they're the majority, but not for any other reason. Okay.
And how will this affect the law of return in terms of who can immigrate to the state?
Well, the way the issue of immigration should be normalized. When I say normalized, I mean that we should be like a normal state where the state determines who is eligible to enter the country, okay? And that eligibility shall be discussed, but it should not be limited to one particular national group. In other words, whoever has roots in this area, okay, may he be Palestinian, may he be Armenian, may he be Jewish, okay, can apply for citizenship or entry into the country. And that would be done by some kind of quota system, which would be based on two considerations. One of them, economic considerations, meaning some agreement with the cantons, that each canton would say, I'm willing to accept this year, whatever, this number of this number and this number. And also some kind of system which would prevent a change in the demographic balance, so we don't have a situation where all the immigrants happen to be Palestinians and only a few Jews will come in. We'll always do something practical. And I think looking at the situation economically and the potential immigration, I think it's pretty clear that we can make the quotas as we can write the quotas that they're always big enough to accept anybody who wants to come, and nothing will happen. Okay, nothing, no change, no disaster in any way will happen. It'll only be, it'll only be good. Okay, so let's say that we have a two-third population ratio. We'll have a two-third immigration ratio. What's wrong with that? Okay. So, and that can change over time. The less this issue is emotionally loaded, and the more it becomes a civil state, a civic state, and we're happy with each other, and they're happy the way it works, the less of a problem is.
Okay, so where I'm coming from right now at this moment is not that anything that you said is good or bad, is right or wrong, is acceptable or unacceptable. I'm trying to identify two areas now, I see two, that are lacking in terms of the amount of attention that was given in your presentation. Okay.
Okay.
One is the ownership of the land.
Okay.
How that would change and be different under the Federation as opposed to the way it is today. And now the second one would be immigration. And how would that be handled under the construct of the Federation as compared with today? Those are the two things that if you had it included in your presentation, your proposal, and whatever, at the summary level where you're at, okay, then I could share it with the people that I would share it with, okay? But I couldn't do that right now because these two holes, you know.
No, that's why you know, I'm answering your questions. And one of the, first of all, actually I'm very comfortable talking to you and also in a small circle about this. The immigration of issue is loaded emotionally. Okay, to even discuss immigration, you know, glibly as I do it, you know, as if it's a normal issue, okay, is like a death wish, okay, because, you know, people's coming down on you and saying, oh, that will be the end. It will be the end of Zionism, the end of Israel, the end of the Jewish state, the end of humanity, okay. So well, no, but that's the reactions you get, okay. So I'm that's one of the reasons I don't make a big issue out of this. And when people ask, then I have, you know, I can go into it. Similar to the extent is also the land issue. Okay, the land issue is also loaded, although it's a little less loaded. People aren't really aware of it. Okay, so much aware of it. But it's a ridiculous situation where you have, I think, about 20% of the land owned by by Keren Kayemet, the Jewish National Fund, which can only give it to Jews or only lease it to Jews, or all kinds of strange arrangements to swapping the land with the state so Arabs can't extend their cities, and it's a ridiculous, completely ridiculous arrangement which will stop. Okay, this will not be anymore. There will be land owned by the state and land owned by whoever owns it, but not land owned by some entity which is owned by the Jewish people. Okay, anybody ask the Jewish people? Nobody asks the Jewish people. You know, Israel takes the position that we're the state of the Jewish people. We talk on behalf of the Jewish people. We just don't happen never to ask them. We know what's good for the Jewish people. So that's not going to be. We know what's good for the Israeli people. Okay, the Jewish people, if they want to weigh in on this, please, by all means do. But then you have to become Israeli citizens, and that land, the state of Israel, is the state for those who come. Okay, it's not a state which is kept in some kind of limbo for all those who are abroad. So you have a situation that a anti-Zionist Satmar has more rights than a Palestinian who was born in Hebron. It just doesn't make sense. So these are issues which are, they're not being discussed. So when we're talking about
they're explosive. They're explosive.
They're absolutely explosive, and we're gonna have a few explosions going off here and there when we talk. Okay, but that's the only way to get them into discussion, because if you don't talk about it, you have a bomb lying under your table, and it's going to go off sometime. But we're trying to make believe it's not there isn't doing anybody any good. You have to talk about in good faith.
Yeah, but that's what I'm trying to say, is don't make believe that these issues don't exist. I mean, you need to talk about them. I'm not saying talk about them right now, which you're doing, which is great. I'm saying add them as a screenshot to your presentation. That's all I'm suggesting.
No. I thought, to have the refugee issue there and give some headlines and then respond to questions I think is fair enough. Okay, first of all, it's interesting because depending on the audience, some audiences are much more concerned about security, They don't give a damn about the refugees because they understand that they can't come back. Okay, no matter what. So I don't even go there. Okay, or I only touch on it. But so it gives me a little bit more flexibility when I give it, depending on the audience. But I completely agree that also that my feeling is that the more I give these presentations, the more I talk about these issues. I also feel more confident talking about them.
They have to be discussed. It can't be, hidden
Absolutely. No.
under the rug, like it's been
absolutely.
for so many years under the rug.
Absolutely not. No. Okay. Any other questions?
Okay, so if no one else has a question, I could go. But does anyone else have a question?
Don't be scared.
Okay, so it doesn't look like it. So my question is that the government of Israel and the West Bank that you have proposed presupposes no PA. So the question then becomes, what scenario possible scenarios with respect to the development or dismantling of the PA would this represent? That's my question.
Okay. Well, first of all, there's at least two scenarios. One scenario is the dissolution of the PA, and just, either by virtue of it falling apart by itself or by whatever Israel, some active measures to dismantle it. That would be one a way of dealing with it, which I'm not sure is a good idea. The better idea would probably be to morph the PA or elements of the Palestinian Authority into the regional administration of the cantons. The problem with that is that the Palestinian population is very, very anti-PA, and it would, in any case, whatever administration we would have in the cantons would have to be elected by the Palestinians there. So we'd have. This is something which I would like some academics to look at it and say, how could we do this? How could we run this? This is it's pretty critical, and it has very little. I feel that right now I can say that is with confidence. But on one side, I would like to, and probably most Palestinians would also like to have the Palestinian Authority be done away with. On another level, they are running the show right now, and it wouldn't be bad to have somebody in place to run the show. So maybe we could, do in a way what. It's an unpleasant comparison, but like the Allies did in Europe after VE Day, they picked up, they picked certain people from high administration positions and put them into power to start a democratic administration. This would probably would be a very patronizing thing to do. But it probably would work well if we pick the right people. But again, there are probably other solutions, and we'd have to talk to Palestinians about that, obviously. But it's a major issue. I don't know if that was a good answer.
Okay, thank you. So yes, obviously, these things would need to be developed organically, as I see it, by a stepwise process. So there was a scenario where the PA threatened to dismantle ahead of the annexation.
Yes, yeah. They, every once in a while they come up with it where we're just going to go away. We still have to see that, because the moment they dissolve, they're not going to get all that money they're getting, and that's probably one of the reasons they don't dissolve. But it doesn't mean they won't eventually.
Yes. So given that you're assuming they don't actually want to dissolve, to what extent do you believe the current Israeli government thinks that it could call the PA's bluff?
First of all, I don't think we have a government at this time. Okay, so we don't have a functioning at this time. Israel, we're moving on by inertia. Okay, so nothing we do is planned. Nothing is thought of ahead of time. There's no. I don't think there's any thinking about it. I'm sure the army has some drawer plan in the drawer which says, you know, when they dissolve, we do this. We take this building, this building, this building, this building, and put our army administration in place, and so on and so forth. But the government of Israel, I'm sure they have no idea. They're not thinking about it. So this is, you know, we just. I'm sorry, but I'm afraid there's, you know, just too much uncertainty to make any kind of statement on that.
Okay, cool. So another question I had for you is, can you imagine some of the more interesting things that a canton might want to do?
Well, first of all, one thing cantons can do, they can develop their own economy based on what they want to do. They can generate income by giving out cantonal bonds and doing things they would, you know, they would usually have to have money from the central government for, but they can do it on their own. The other thing is they can make themselves more attractive to immigration or to cross canton from other cantons by lowering tax rates or giving benefits, giving land to whoever comes. They're going to have a lot of independence in running their show, and of course they can, you know, make laws within reason, within the limits of the federal constitution, that are beneficial to that particular cultural group that is dominant in the particular canton. For example, they can set the days of rest, and they can, you know, run their buses the way they want to run their buses, all again within the reason of agreed upon federal constitution. So there's a lot of independence for the and also, of course, also in the educational system, they're going to have a lot of freedom, other than a certain basic curriculum which would include 2 languages. I'm talking about Hebrew and Arabic, okay, and English, of course, would have to be, those 3 languages would have to be part of the core curriculum, and civic studies and whatever else, one other or you know, another 3 or 4 things, and other than that, the cantons can, you know, put the emphasis on what they want to put the emphasis in their particular area. Okay, so
I wanted to say thank you for giving this talk. I'm going to end the recording and open the floor for unrecorded and open discussion.
Okay.